We can go ahead and get started. So this chapter, we cover adolescence, and just like we've seen in the past, we cover the physical and like cognitive development, and then we talk about the social or emotional development. So these adolescents will follow the same format. The only thing that kind of bothers me is that I put a test in between there. I hate to split up stages of development, but that's okay. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. So we'll cover the physical development, and then we have a test this weekend. And then once we get, the next week is spring break. And then when we get back from spring break, we'll start with the social and emotional development. Okay, so all right, so in this chapter, we get to cover the fun topic of puberty and body image issues and sexuality for our adolescents or our teenagers. So setting the stage, right, talking a little bit about puberty. You all are obviously past this stage. Some of you might be closer to it than others. But I think we all can certainly remember going through puberty. So puberty, you know, involves a lot of changes, a lot of internal changes that cause some external changes that everyone can see and notice, right? So there's it's hormones that drive this change, and it leads us from looking like children and turns us into people that look like adults. And that's really the process of puberty. It's turning you from a child into an adult. And that's that outward appearance, right? And what's happening is that obviously it's leading to sexual maturity, or the ability to, you know, procreate, right, or make children. So most people don't realize this, that it takes an average of 5 years to complete. We usually think of one landmark event and we say, oh, that child's in puberty. But really it takes quite some time, just because our hormones travel by blood, and it's a long process. It's a slow communication system that we have in our bodies. So really, you know, it's not unnecessary or unexpected to have a child, you know, say 7, 8, 9 years of age that is already starting to have some hormonal influences there. And why I put that age so young is because when we think of our kind of our landmark age of 12 for girls starting their periods, and you know, that's one of the last things that happens during puberty. So they have already started a lot of the other changes that have already started taking place years before that. So let's see a little bit about this coming of age or becoming an adult. For girls, right, we always think of that the period, right, starting their menstruation. We call that menarche, the very first menstruation. And for boys, this is a much quieter passage into adulthood, but we call this spermarchy, and it's that first time that there's the presence of sperm or semen. There are obviously very big cultural and gender differences when we talk about the coming of age or puberty. For girls, it's a very well-known passage, and usually it's because when a girl starts her period, she needs the help of someone else, right? She needs a mom or an older sister or dad or somebody to go buy her products. So it's not a quiet, it's not a secretive passage. And for boys, it is secretive, it is quiet, it's not discussed. No one needs to know, no one needs to help that individual. So it is a very quiet. We usually celebrate boys entering puberty, and girls, we celebrate to an extent. We do have things, Sweet 16 or debutantes and things like that. But for the most part, menstruation is a negative. It's frowned upon almost. It's not talked about and so on. So there are definitely cultural differences. This chart is interesting because it shows that we are definitely entering puberty earlier and earlier and earlier compared to, say, here, like the late 1800s. Obviously, this chart is very old. We could use an updated chart because now we're well past the 1960s, but you can see here that a long time ago, the average age of girls starting their periods was around 15, 16 years of age. And that has continually declined over the years. If this continued on to current day, I can tell you right now, our line already hits 12. Okay, so the average age of menstruation for girls in the United States is 12. Why is this the case? Lots of reasons. A lot of people bring up the food we eat, the hormones that are present in the food that we eat. Some people bring up the hormone disruptors that are found in like plastics and things like that. Those are all biological factors. There's social factors. We could say that we are just much more sexualized. We have a lot more presence of sexuality in TV and in everything that we do. There's also a kind of an evolutionary perspective that if girls are around males, they might enter into puberty a little bit sooner. And so, compared to like the 1860s, where maybe not everybody was in school together, certainly by now, by 5 years old, even possibly sooner than that, everybody, you have boys and girls together. And so maybe that presence of males is just causing girls to enter into puberty a lot sooner. Another factor that needs to be mentioned is obesity rates. I know we talked, I believe, a little bit about obesity rates when we were talking about childhood, and we have about 4 times as many children now classified as obese compared to, say, the 1970s. And why that matters is we have kind of this magic weight of 103 pounds that it's seen that a girl will probably start her period around that weight. That doesn't mean go get anybody on the scale tonight. Just because they hit 103 doesn't mean they're going to start right away, but that just tends to be our magic weight. And we know that little girls are hitting 103 pounds a whole lot sooner than they did, say, a long time ago. All right, so there's 2 main systems that are guiding our hormones and our puberty and all of this good stuff. So we have the adrenal pathway, and then we have this HPG pathway, if you want to think of it that way. So the adrenal glands produce androgens. Andro, that root word there, means male. So largely our androgens are testosterone. And so all of these androgens are going to spur growth that you could attribute to testosterone. So definitely hair, right? Starting to get hair in different places. Testosterone is, largely responsible for acne and changes in your skin. And we know for sure testosterone is directly linked to libido or sexual desire. So these little kids, are walking around, they've got hair growing, they've got acne, and they are, sexually driven. And we see those androgens start to secrete or kick up or be on the rise in middle childhood. Okay, so if you think back to your own childhood, when did you first start having crushes on, the kids in your class? Those first crushes, maybe third grade, fourth grade for sure. And some kids maybe even younger than that. And that is because of testosterone, okay? So HPG axis is our hypothalamus and our pituitary gland, and then our gonads. The hypothalamus is a brain structure. It's directly responsible for, body maintenance and hormones. I like to think of him as the CEO and the president of your endocrine system. His general manager or his right-hand guy is the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland, since it is a gland, it's a part of the endocrine system, but he does have a penthouse office. He's up in the head as well. And then your gonads, right? Testes if you're a male, or ovaries if you're a female. So this whole system constantly is in a loop system, and it's getting feedback about how your hormones are doing. Okay, so the hypothalamus, checks the blood and it says, oh, it's low on estrogen. So it tells the pituitary gland, hey, we're low on estrogen. And the pituitary gland in turn will tell the ovaries, we're low on estrogen, kick it up a little bit. So then they start kicking it up. In a few days' time, the hypothalamus gets another report and we're too high on estrogen. So then it tells the pituitary gland, hey, we're too high on estrogen. And he says, yes, sir. And so then he tells the ovaries, hey, we're too high on estrogen. And they're like, okay, yes, sir. So they stop producing as much estrogen. And it is just this constant loop feedback system. I kind of think of it like a thermostat in your house. Okay. I think this is well known. I don't know, maybe it's not. Ovaries obviously are responsible for mostly producing like your estrogens and progesterone and things like that. Testes are largely responsible for producing testosterone. So, there's that, right? The testes are the ovaries. Obviously, the boys have estrogen and girls have testosterone, and that's normal. We just, of course, girls have more estrogen and boys have more testosterone. Okay, here's a little nice chart that's just showing exactly what I was talking about. The hypothalamus telling the pituitary gland, and then in turn sending messages to either the ovaries or the testes. I think it's right here important to note that hormones produce some of these major changes that characterize puberty. Okay, so the first one right here, if you can see, is growth spurt, right? The growth spurt. And of course, this is relative. Sometimes I have people tell me, I never got my growth spurt. I never grew. That's, you did, just maybe not as much as you wanted, right? So it's all relative to how tall you're going to be, genetics, and so on. But sometimes, you might go to, say, Christmas, you see your cousins, and then when you see them at Easter, they've grown, several inches, or sometimes like a whole foot or something crazy, and you're like, wow, you grew overnight. That right there is your first sign that this child is in puberty. The growth spurt is the very first thing. That is the first event that happens in puberty. So whenever they hit that growth spurt, and for girls, sometimes it's not as noticeable, a few inches maybe. And then we have here primary sexual characteristics, and we have secondary sexual characteristics. So the primary sexual characteristics, they might be on the next slide. Let's see. Oh, yes, they are. Okay. The primary sexual characteristics are anything that's necessary that you have to have in order to make a baby. Okay. So anything that you can do or that you have that is going to enable that. So for a girl, she has to be ovulating, she has to be menstruating, and she has to have like, well, a uterus, right? It all has to be functioning. So really that sign is menstruation, because as soon as menstruation happens, we know she's ovulating, usually. She's ovulating and her uterus is working the way it's supposed to. So that's a good sign that she is able to reproduce. Okay. For boys, it's growth of the penis, going from looking more like a little kid to more like a man. Obviously, that does not mean that size matters. It doesn't. And then here it says testes. Yes, of course, he has to have testes. But really what that should say is maturation of the testes. So we need the testes to mature. And then how you know that happens is this next thing here, that you have the onset of spermarchy. Okay, so as soon as he starts ejaculating, then we know for the most part, he most likely has sperm and he would be able to have a baby. So the secondary sexual characteristics are kind of like just the icing on the cake. They're all the other things that come along with puberty that you don't necessarily have to have in order to have a baby, but they're changes that occur, and we kind of think of them like little flags. They're like flags that are being waved to tell other people, hey, I'm an adult, I can reproduce. Okay, so the things that we have there, these are just a few examples, but hair growth, right? All the hair growth in different places. Boys get a deeper voice. Acne, for girls, breast development, and there's more. So boys start to get more of a muscle mass. Girls get wider hips. And maybe that, well, and the growth spurt, of course. So all of those things together is what makes a child into an adult. So some timetables here and some differences, really, again, it's very hard to predict exactly when things will happen. Once things start happening, then it's a lot easier to kind of predict the sequence, but it's very difficult to say, okay, she's going to start when she's 13, she's going to start when she's 11, she's going to start when she's 12. That's really hard to do. But once we see that growth spurt, then we know, okay, that here's going to be the sequence of events. So for girls, about 6 months after the growth spurt, she's going to start to have breast development and pubic hair. Okay, menarche starts, like it says here, in the middle to the very last. Okay, so a little girl is going to start changing, and if you're a mom or you're an older sister, an aunt or something like that, then when you start to see those changes, that should cue into your head, okay, she's probably going to start pretty soon. Obviously, the rate of change is variable, and always know that there's a lot of internal changes that are happening as well. Okay. Boys, after the growth of the testes and the penis begins, you start to get the growth of body hair. Height comes in a lot more for boys, and muscle mass. Boys have a major change in their whole, because of the muscle mass, their cardiovascular system, their body changes, their larynx changes. So they get some unique growth going on there. Their hands, their feet, and their legs start to grow first. This is the first time, or the only time, if you want to think about it that way, that a human being is out of that cephalocaudal sequence, right? We used to, for little babies and little kids, head to toe, internal to external, or inside, middle to outside, and then big muscles to fine detail. For teenagers in puberty, that system's all out of whack. It's actually, hands, feet, legs start growing, torso lengthening, and so on. And really what I like to joke is that they're catching up to their head, right? Their bodies are finally lengthening out and growing into the way it's supposed to be. But this causes really some that awkwardness of teenagers that you see. Sometimes you see these tall boys trying to play, basketball in middle school, early high school, and they're just kind of like, they just kind of run funny. They kind of handle the ball weird, they walk weird. And that's just because everything is growing at such a fast rate, and it's out of that normal sequence that we typically grow. That does happen for girls too, but usually it's not as marked or noticeable. Okay. So, this is just changes in blood cells. You can see that boys are really, really increasing there because of the amount of growth that's happening, and lengthening of bones, and the muscle mass, and the cardiovascular system. So this timetable, I really like a lot. It's a little confusing, but we can break it down. So first, pink is girls, and then green is boys. At the bottom, we have age in years. And then along the top, we have, your y-axis over there, you have the different events that happen in puberty. I think one thing that's important to know that I mentioned about the growth spurt is the first thing that happens. And that is true. For boys, it's sometimes less noticeable. And for boys, it's, it can be very dramatic, but at times it's so extended that it could be hard to notice. Girls is it's like a shorter time span. And in fact, we usually say about 3 years after she starts her period, you really are probably not going to see any more growth after that. And so you can see here for a girl, she's growing, and then all of a sudden it's this sharp decline. Okay. For boys, it's a little more drawn out. It is not uncommon even for parents to send away a boy to college and he comes back even taller. So boys can continue to grow for quite some time. Girls obviously start a lot sooner. And this is when you see, especially in middle school, little girls are so much taller than the boys. And it's not until around high school that you start to see that really starts to change, where typically boys are taller. Okay, I guess that's kind of all I wanted to talk about on that slide. So overweight and puberty, I talked about that a little bit. Obviously, little girls, they hit that 103 pounds sooner. And so it certainly can cause those hormones to be a little advanced as well, I guess. And so it can cause a little girl to go into puberty a lot earlier. They have also now linked rapid weight gain in a baby girl's first few months of life to a high BMI later. Okay, so we love little chunky babies, trust me, right? We love the rolls, we love them to be, chubby and healthy, but make sure, it's not excessive. It's not too much weight gain at the beginning. Really try and follow the pediatrician's guidelines there, and try and watch that child's eating habits. We don't want to overfeed a baby. Okay, this one, if you're going to try and predict whether a little girl is going to enter into puberty early or not, there's a lot of things that go into play. Obviously, hereditary. If the mom was an early starter, chances are she's going to be an early starter. If mom was a late starter, chances are the little girl's going to be a late starter. So sometimes, just parents, how did they go through puberty? African Americans, we tend to see little girls enter into puberty sooner, and there could be all kinds of reasons for that. Some of those reasons that I had mentioned earlier. If this little girl is overweight, did she gain weight rapidly when she was young? And we want to look at stress and unhappiness or an insecure attachment. So we know stress can also lead to starting puberty sooner. And so again, we could add that to the African American, theory that perhaps these little girls are just a lot more stressed. And then there's all kinds of reasons why that might happen. So, the changes for kids going through puberty are, every child always wants to be older than they are. They like to be confused with, that they're older than they are. And certainly kids want to grow up fast. So the changes are usually exciting, but sometimes they can be a little scary because they don't really know what's happening. We can be under the influence of hormones, and that can be quite shocking or scary to people, and they may not know why they're feeling so angry or feeling so aggressive or feeling so sad. Girls have a constant monthly reminder about the influence that hormones has on us. Boys, if you're around girls, then you're aware of that influence. Or boys, you can think back to puberty. Were you overly aggressive at times? Were you slamming doors and didn't know why? Were you getting angry and you didn't know why? Girls, right? Are you crying and you don't know why? You're just upset and you can't put your finger on it. If you've ever been around a pregnant lady, right? And all of those things that pregnant women go through, hunger, cravings, body temperature, right? Do they get too hot? Do they get too cold? And of course, the mood. Okay, the mood and the changes. And so you have a little kid here that doesn't understand why they're angry or why they're upset. Just think back to, okay, it's probably hormones, right? And don't press them too much. Don't try and get them to, explain it too much, because they may not be able to. If they say, I don't know, that might be a viable answer. Okay, so I think the best thing to work with someone in a fit of rage or moodiness with hormones is not to try and tell them to calm down, because that's not going to work, but to say, okay, you're probably under the influence of hormones, and definitely with little kids, trying to get them to recognize the best ways to express emotion and handle their emotions, rather than try and not feel that emotion, because that's impossible. But there are certainly appropriate ways to deal with emotions. Okay.